And welcome back. It's time to deploy this application to Microsoft Azure. Now, you could go to the Azure portal, portal.azure.com, and I am using, by the way, a free account here. And you could create all of the resources that are needed through the portal. Instead, however, I'm going to show off another extension that works in Visual Studio Code and in GitHub Codespaces. So we're going to deploy this and create all the resources needed for this video at least inside of Codespaces. And there's going to be an extension for that. So I'll go back over to the extensions pane, and this time I'll search for Azure. And here's the Azure Tools extension pack, which includes 8 different extensions. I'm going to go ahead and install all of them because we're going to need a couple of them for this demo. The first one that we're going to be using here is for Azure App Service. Now, Azure App Service is a platform as a service offering which will serve our web application, serve our Flask application, and that's already finished now. So if I go over here, you'll see I have this new button in the sidebar, and if I click it, it's going to ask me to sign into Azure. And since I'm already in the browser, Codespaces knows this, and it's going to open up a tab asking me which account that I want to sign in with. It'll tell me I can close this window, and in just a few seconds we'll see that it has recognized my subscription. And if I open this, you'll see all these different services here that I can manage from within Visual Studio Code. And the first one that we're going to use, like I said, is Azure App Service. So I'm going to right click on it, and I have these 2 options to create a new web app. I'm going to choose the advanced one. It's really not that much more strenuous. It just gives you a few options, and if you don't choose this, it makes assumptions for you, and I don't like those assumptions. So it's not really a big deal to choose this one. I do want to create a new web app name, and the name for this web app is actually going to be a subdomain of azurewebsites.net. So I'll stick with what I used for the meeting earlier this week and say MemPy Jan 23 web, I believe it was. Press enter. Create a resource group. It's a good idea to group all of your related resources for an application. In this case, since I'm using a free account, I have limited resources, and let's say that I want to free these resources up and use it for something else. I can just, instead of hunting down all of the resources this application uses, I can put them into a resource group and then just delete the entire resource group. So I'll tell it to create a new resource group, and instead of using web, I'll say -RG for resource group. Select a runtime stack. Now, as you saw in one of the earlier videos, that we were using Python 3.10. There are also other languages, .NET, PHP, JavaScript, but I'm going to use Python 3.10. I'll select a geographic location, where the data center is actually going to be located. I'll choose a location near me in the East US. And then, if you don't have an app service plan created, which here we don't, we'll have to create a new one. And this is where you decide, after giving it a name, so I'll just say plan. This is where you decide how much compute power is going to need to go behind this web application. It also decides how much you're going to be charged. And here, the free F1 plan, that will give you the ability, as it says, to not be charged. And then Application Insights is performance and monitoring. We're not going to use it for this demo, so I'll just skip it. And you'll see down here that it is creating the web app. I'm going to go ahead and speed this up to the magic of video, though. All right, the web app has now been created and the app plan along with it. We're almost ready to deploy, but I need one more thing. So I'm going to go back over here to the File Explorer, and I need to have inside of the MemPy directory, inside of the root of the application, I need to put in a requirements.txt file. Now, if you've worked with Python, you know that requirements.txt, you can do a pip install -r and the name of a file, which is usually requirements.txt, to say what dependencies this application has. And the reason we want to do this for Azure is because when we created the plan, or created the app rather, Azure asked, hey, what stack do you want to use? And we chose Python 3.10. So when this is deployed, Azure's going to say, okay, this is a Python application. I need to look for a requirements.txt file to see what dependencies this application has. Now, you may have seen people take the short route, and I do this a lot as well, sometimes by saying pip freeze and then redirecting that output to requirements.txt. This will work. This will still work on Azure. However, let's take a look at something. Inside of Codespaces, a lot of packages are installed for you. So, for example, we have scikit-learn, we have pandas, we have matplotlib, we have a lot of Jupyter Notebook, a lot of things that we're not going to use. And if you just put all of that into the requirements.txt file, then when you deploy it, it's going to try to install all of that on Azure App Service, and it's just going to take a long time to deploy. Now, if you need all of that, great, but we don't need it. So I'm going to create a requirements.txt file manually and call it requirements.txt, and then I'll just put Flask inside of it. And that's all I need. So everything is now in this MemPy directory. Now I can go back to Azure, right-click on App Service, or not actually, open App Services, right-click on the web app I just created, deploy to web app, go to the folder that contains the web app, which is this MemPy folder, click OK. This is telling me that anything that currently exists is going to be overwritten, but there's nothing there, so I'll go ahead and click deploy. And then it says to check the output window for the details. And I'll go ahead and speed this up through the magic of video as well, but there are some things I want to point out. Now what you'll notice is that it's zipping up the files in the directory. And here it's detecting the Python version, which is going to be 3.10.9 on the server. And here it's creating a virtual environment, and then it will find the requirements.txt file and install the dependencies in there, which right now is just Flask, along with the dependencies for Flask in that virtual environment. All right, now that this is done, I'll scroll back up here to where when it's running pip install. So here's where it's getting Flask, and here's where it's getting all the dependencies for Flask. All right, now all I need to do is go to my web app, click on Browse Website, and here you can see the name of the website, .azurewebsites.net. Click Open. And I'll speed this up also because the first time when that instance is warming up, it can take a little bit extra before it's actually working. And here we go. Welcome to the MemPy blog. Works just like it did in the Codespace. So let's review what happened here. And actually, before I do that, I'll go over here and show you that if I go to my resource groups in the portal, I do have a resource group. And I do have the web service and the app service plan. So what happened? We used a Codespace to create a Flask application and then ran it inside of the Codespace and then use the Azure extensions to deploy that to Azure. And here we have it. And this is a public URL, by the way. This is a public URL. And we didn't download anything, we didn't install anything, and what I think is really worth pointing out is we didn't pay for anything either. So you could do this theoretically in a Chromebook or on an iPad even. You don't have to have a full-blown desktop machine. And it took probably about 20 minutes, and that's even with me gabbing, to get this done. So that's how easy it was. Now in the next video, we'll start looking at how to add database to this application.